We're all counting on you.
Yo, everyone. This is Inside Movies Galore, hosted by Dane. I have actually tied up David Streggy, who normally hosts this show. He is back in my gutter basement, and he's probably struggling for dear life and suffocating, but it's all right, because yeah, he'll be fine. I have taken over the show. It is mine, my creation. But to bring you listeners some comfort, we have been joined by the usual suspects. If you would like to introduce yourself one by one, in no particular order.
Okay, I'll go first.
Yes,
I'm Katie Cadaver.
Victim number one, step forward.
Yes, hi, I'm Katie Cadaver, model, burlesque dancer, artist, and dead girl with Dead Girls Dark Coffin class from Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Awesome. Victim number two, step forward.
All right. Well, I'm Septum Sen from Septum Sen versus the World. Here with my wife, Kim, and we're here for the second time.
I don't have an alias.
Right.
I have an alias. I just use my real name.
That's all right. The more real the name, the more real the suffering, and that's how we like it on this show. Now, victim number three, please step forward.
3? Why do I have to be 3? All right,
Yeah,
fine. I'm Dustin.
You can be
I live
victim
in
number
Milwaukee. I like movies, and I go to school. And I talk
Sweet.
a lot, so yeah.
The longer that you keep your mouth open, the more likely that we can do things to it as we sit here in our little dungeon. So anyway, the last victim, I believe that you, Celeste, are the last victim on our lineup.
All right, I'm Celeste. I am a horror host on Dead Girls Dark Coffin Classics. And I am also the host of the Glamour Junkies Burlesque Troupe in Milwaukee.
And I am Dave Kyle, independent filmmaker from Charlotte, North Carolina. And like I said before, I have taken over the show. David Streggy is most likely dying from suffocation, but that's okay. So no matter. Tonight we are talking about Tobe Hooper, the late great Tobe Hooper, his seminal classic, the 1974 slasher, actually proto-slasher success story known as the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Something that our smorgasbord, shall we say, requested to do last week, and it's certainly one of my favorites. And whoever would like to start off just talking about when it was the first time that they saw the film, what were their impressions then versus now, that sort of thing. Whoever wants to start.
I'll go ahead and start.
Please do.
Mine's gonna be long.
Well,
Go ahead.
I'm older than probably some of y'all. I'm in my 30s, and my brothers are much older than me. So in the 80s, a lot of times my father was military, my mom was in Sundown, and a lot of times my brothers were looking at me at night. We watched a lot.
Hey Dane, could you try putting in headphones?
Me? Try putting in headphones?
Yeah.
Yes.
Backwards feed again?
Yeah.
I couldn't
Let me
make out
try.
anything you just said.
Yeah. Let me try disconnecting my speakers.
Okay.
How about that?
Well, it's when we talk.
Yeah.
Try it then. Is it still doing that?
Is it?
Yes.
I'm not hearing
I
it.
still don't know what.
Echo.
Try going again.
Well, perhaps, should I log out again?
Yes, try that.
All right, I'll be right back. Just keep talking.
All right. What I was saying, like, my brothers, they let me watch horror movies, with the caveat that I had to understand that they weren't real. Texas Chainsaw Massacre was one of the first ones they showed me, and holy effing you know what? Because we lived in Louisiana. We took a lot of trips to Texas. And I remember the backseat of my parents' and my dad's up front. Both him and my mom were smoking cigarettes. My dad was smoking cigarettes. I'm sitting in my little car seat with my brothers, and they're like, yo, Leatherface. Actually, the next gas station yet. Just like in the movie. Gonna get you. And that movie's it's still kind of dumb. You know that people like that.
What are you doing, Dane?
It's not letting me exit because if it does, it'll stop the whole thing.
Try putting in headphones so that your speakers aren't on, so that you can hear us through the headphones.
All right. Well, I don't really have. I have some earbuds. Maybe I'll try that.
Those are headphones. Holy bejesus.
Can you just temporarily untie David?
Hang on.
So exciting.
Just keep talking.
Well, I mean, like I said, it's
painful to talk.
Oh, well, I'll let somebody else come back to me.
I don't know, so from what I could tell, you saw it kind of like at a drive-in, and it was sort of like a sneaking around sort of thing?
No, my brother showed it to me at home. It came on one of the movie channels because we had cable, all the movie channels, and my parents were always working, and my brothers were visiting me.
Okay. So
It was a very small town in Louisiana. We didn't have a whole lot around us.
Monster movies. Whew.
Mine's boring. I picked it up at Walmart in the $5 bin. It was a steelbook. I wanted it, and then I got to see it the first time and freaked out my friend and co-host at the time. he still is freaked out by that.
He's a punk.
It's taking so long, Dane.
All right. Yeah, sorry about that. The headphones that I had readily available were for the new iPhone. So they had the flash or the lightning extension rather than the traditional headphone extension. So that took me a while.
Test.
But anyway.
Hooray!
Yeah, it sounds
big.
It sounds way better.
Yeah, it sounds fine. Okay.
Okay. Anyway, Steelbook, Walmart, go.
Yeah, basically that was the whole of it. I ended up finding it in the $5 bin at Walmart, which is Steelbook, which is actually a collector's edition nowadays. It's amazing what you can find at that $5 bin. And that was what, 5 or 6 years? No, more than that now. It's almost 10 years ago now.
That was in 2010 because I got my first Steelbook copy of it out of the same bin.
Okay, so probably, yeah, that might be right then, because it's sort of like a copperish tone on it.
Yep, and it's got him from the end with like the dancing thing. It's 2 discs. It's by Black Sky, Dark Sky. Close enough,
Yeah.
You know what I mean.
Like I say, it was a beautiful set. So I mean, I still have it. We watched it last night to revisit it. But I showed it to my co-host.
Night before last.
And he actually is not a big horror movie fan when it comes to sadistic or torture, and so that one probably was torture for him.
Well,
if I might just interject for a moment, just welcome to the show, KJ. Just for the fact that you just joined us now, KJ, I am hosting the show for right now because I've decided to tie up and gag David. He's in the basement, probably dying of suffocation, and my speakers were on, causing horrible reverberation. I have my old earbuds in now, and that way it doesn't cause the echo. We are talking about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Tobe Hooper's seminal 1974 masterpiece, and you can jump in whenever you want. Now, please continue.
Alrighty, I think, yeah. I want to say hey to everybody. I hope everybody's been okay, doing well. Texas
Depends.
Chainsaw Massacre. where do I start? Um, I remember the movie when I was a kid. I think most of my friends had already seen because I was always a wuss. I didn't really want to watch horror movies. I mean, I always was, but most of them had already seen Chainsaw Massacre. So it was like, yeah, it's a good movie, this, that, and the other. I'm thinking to myself, okay, I might check it out one day when I'm actually man enough to watch a horror movie. So when I saw it, David sent me the video to watch the movie, and when I saw it, I was like, I can see why this movie is as big as it is. It's not one of my favorites, but I will say this. I mean, it is a good movie for what it is. It really is.
Are
Um,
you not as much of a fan of slashers or proto slashers?
I think the only film that really was like a slasher film, and it's kind of like this movie to some degree. I don't know if any of you have seen it. I think it was called The Town That Dreaded Sundown.
Oh yeah.
Town That Dreaded Sundown. Like that's probably like one of my first introductions to the slasher film, and it kind of has. What the hell? Oh, but okay. Um,
I think
oh.
that I think Dustin just barfed up his lung.
You okay there? God dang. But whatchamacallit, but yeah, Town of Dreaded Sundown was kind of like my introduction to slasher film. So it was a great film, for what it is. And I did not know that Tobe Hooper actually directed what was the movie how do you say that name?
Poltergeist?
Yes, thank you. I couldn't even pronounce that.
Yeah.
Thank you. So
Well, he
way worse.
directed it, quote unquote. But interesting little fact while we're on Poltergeist. So that movie, the screenplay was written by Steven Spielberg, produced by Steven Spielberg, shot in the exact same neighborhood as E.T. the Extraterrestrial, at the same time as E.T. the Extraterrestrial, released within like a week or two apart of each other. And because of the DGA rules, Spielberg could not direct Poltergeist, and so basically he was still heavily involved as a producer, as he has often been when he has been a producer, not a director. But there has been some dispute about the director credit. Even though you can see a little bit of Tobe Hooper's more brutal in Poltergeist, but it's still very Spielbergian in its approach and in its style. But nevertheless, we're not talking about Poltergeist. We're talking about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. But overall, did you like it?
I did. I mean, if I had to give it a scale of 1 to 10, I would give it a 6 or a 7 on a scale of 1 to 10.
Anybody want to jump at KJ's throat and rip it out over that comment?
my only complaint about the film is the overacting. I mean, I know it's the 70s, and I know that's kind of like the style of what acting was back then, but good Lord, they overact. And then, of course, the brother, Franklin, Jesus Christ.
Well, here may I question though, because people had similar objections to the Blair Witch Project, because even Heather, whatever her name, she got a Worst Actress win at the Razzies for 1999. The only question I have is that if you were actually in a horrific situation, whether it be found footage or slasher type situation, whatever, would you act very understated and dignified? No, you'd be running around like a chicken with its head cut off. Not unlike the way that Dustin feels right now, unmistakably. But that's something that I've often wondered is. In cinema, we are typically trained to think of really understated, acting is the way to go, but yeah, in a real situation, you would be screaming your head off, probably.
Well, no, yeah, I'd scream my head off, but it wasn't the screaming that bothered me. It was like, and babe, we were talking about this like with Franklin when they're all in the house kind of playing around, and he's left downstairs in his wheelchair by himself, and he's all like blowing, raspberries at the, I'm having so much fun, I can just die, and he's acting stupid. I'm like, oh,
well.
Nice.
He's
and then they're arguing back and forth when
a problem. Like he was like he had a problem, didn't he? Like he was a paraplegic, I know that, but
yeah.
I thought about if he had a mental disability or something like that.
Yeah, like a mental disability. Didn't he?
Well, he was intentionally supposed to be an unlikable character, so that's kind of what he was going for. Plus, in the context of the moment, you know, like his sister and her friends like just went off to go do whatever.
Yeah.
They just kind of like, oh yeah, you'll be fine down here, right? Well, I don't really want to be alone. All right, bye. It's like,
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, everybody in the, I mean, this is this is a proto slasher, so this is pre-Halloween, but I mean, typically the formula for slasher films is that generally it's young people who are really asshole-ish to each other, and it's especially that way because her brother's is in a wheelchair, which give them some credit that really see main characters in films in general at that time being in a wheelchair, alone in a horror film, which you still don't even really see all that much anymore. But yeah, I mean, that kind of adds to the tension, I think, especially when he's left alone. So I do give him credit for kind of blazing the trail there. But yeah, I do think that's sort of one of the establishments of what would become the slasher formula.
I feel like that time.
well, didn't Don't Look Now have kind of like the slasher formula?
Yeah, I mean, well, then you want to trace it back to like Peeping Tom and Psycho and stuff like that, which came even before this.
Peeping Tom, that's what I was thinking of.
Yeah.
That's that sort of thing.
And actually, the real person who was based off of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre was actually inspiration for Psycho too. Ed Gein.
Yeah, it was Ed Gein. Yeah,
Gein.
He was from Wisconsin.
that's right.
I'm not necessarily sure how I feel about Ed Gein's classification as a serial killer, because as far as we know, he only killed 2 people. He would just dig up corpses. So a lot of people seem to perceive Ed Gein as this like raging monster who just killed dozens and dozens of people. And he killed like 2 people and got caught almost right away.
I think so. I call him a serial killer because he had all the characteristics and he would have continued to kill had he not been caught. So I would classify him as a serial killer, even though technically he doesn't fit the definition.
Yeah, well, he gets
not what people think typically.
He and Richard Speck, they get classified as serial killers, even though actual serial killers with higher body counts often laugh at them at the serial killer conventions because they have such low numbers that they got to beef them up in order to compete. But such is par for the course. It's a tough industry. But yeah, while we're on the subject, Celeste, what did you think of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre?
I first saw it in, I think, 2000, and it was one of the movies that got me really into horror movies. That and Sounds of the Lambs. But I was just traumatized by The Hitchhiker. So I actually got into it. I saw that part first, and it made me go back and watch the rest of the movie because my friends had been watching it, and I walked down that part, and I was like, "Whoa, that's pretty freaky."
Which actually, that was in the film. He mentions head cheese, which is of course the
original title.
That was the original title was head cheese, which describes the gross process of a slaughtering house, which of course is a bit of foreshadowing for what's to come to our asshole-ish teenage protagonists. But yeah, that's a pretty good scene. Do you concur, Katie?
Yes. And I believe Head Cheese was actually a working title. I don't think they had several working titles. Stalking Leatherface and Leatherface were also working titles of the film before they settled on the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yeah. Ultimately, I think they picked the best one, though.
No kidding.
Yeah. Did you? What were your impressions of this film when you first saw it versus now?
Well, I have an interesting story behind the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It was one of the films that my mom saw originally at the drive-in and actually had to ask my dad to take her before the movie was over. She could not sit through it. So I grew up hearing the story of that movie, and it was one of those, it was pretty much forbidden to be on at our house because it scared the shit out of my mom. So I didn't see it for a long time growing up, and it was played up to be a big deal, like the scariest movie. That one and The Exorcist was her other least favorite. So those 2 movies were played up very huge by my mom for years and years of my life. So I had obviously learn about the horror genre, you know about this movie, and I knew I had to watch it. So I had watched bits and pieces of it, which doesn't do it justice, really. So I had an opportunity to actually see it at, I don't know if it was one of the Terror in the Isle events where they did, it might have been the Massacre, but it was one of those things in Chicago that Terror in the Isles puts on their movie things, and they were showing it on the big screen. So I had an opportunity to actually see this movie on the big screen, which was really cool from start to finish in its entirety. And then I've watched it several times since that point. And now looking at it, I mean, I'm actually a really big fan of Part 2. That's my favorite horror movie of all genres.
Part 2 is pretty awesome.
Awesome, yes. So the first one obviously is a big thing. I mean, in the horror genre, it's got to be the most notorious and influential film ever made. So it's when you think about that and just how it's lent itself to so many things that came after it. It's just a pillar. It's a masterpiece as far as I'm concerned.
Well, see, I had a friend a few years ago that was like, they had never seen the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and she said, I don't get why this is a big deal. Like, and I realized that after we, talked it over for a while, she had become desensitized by modern horror.
Right.
Saw, Hostel, Wolf Creek. She had become so desensitized that something like Texas Chainsaw Massacre didn't matter to her anymore. She didn't see that until after she saw the remake from 2003 with Jessica. Yeah, that one with Jessica Biel and
there were worse remakes.
I didn't dislike that one, but she saw the original after that, and she goes, "Oh, I don't see what the big deal is." And I'm like, "Dude, you got to look at the time period. They were coming off of like campy horror of like giant ants and giant roaches and killer."
It's like watching
To be fair,
Return of the Jedi first. Who does that?
Say what again?
To be fair, the giant ants were a full 20 years earlier.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like for years, that was the horror. The birds,
Exactly, like that kind of like psychological kind of stuff, or just like or either that or like silly kind of things.
Yeah, the original Frankenstein, the original Wolfman. So when you had something like, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Last House on the Left, these very visceral horror where it played into your own personal fears, the home invasion or stranger danger. That's why it was so scary. And to me, it is scary. Because we know we have people like that in
I was actually discussing that with my mom today about this movie, because my mom's impression of this movie was such a big influence on me. I was discussing it with her, and she even mentioned Last House on the Left about how, and I said I could relate to her. I said I could see why the Texas Chainsaw Massacre scared you so much, because everything these people were doing, riding around in a van on these country roads. That's what my mom and my dad did in the 70s when they were teenagers, was they rode around in the van and got into trouble. And it was exactly mirrored like their life. They could totally relate to it. And that's how it was different. It wasn't supernatural. It wasn't Dracula or some creature. It was just could be anybody, and that's what made that horror so real and so scary.
When I was in high school, my mom, she showed me The Last House on the Left as a cautionary tale to scare the hell out of me.
That movie is scary.
Yeah, she showed it to me as a way of, this is what could happen if you don't pay attention to your surroundings. This is what could happen if you go looking for trouble in the city. Yeah, my mom she was no joke with that. Now it's Lifetime movies. Those don't scare me though.
Which we should give some shout outs to obviously Tobe Hooper, who just passed away, God rest his soul, but also Wes Craven, who did Last House on the Left, who also passed away not all that long ago, and then John Carpenter, who did Halloween, who's for the moment still with us, all of whom did these very low-budget films that were very influential based on realistic but very visceral fears, all of which became huge successes, spawned remakes and spin-offs and rip-offs and blah, 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 blah. But they all do have that in common, being that they were part of a movement that was about more realistic horror and stuff that could actually happen to you, the viewer, as opposed to stuff that was always removed from reality, like the gothic horror romance of Dracula and the werewolves and things like that, or anything that was overly melodramatic, or even stuff like the Hammer films, which were colorized, depictions of the same central
elements.
Thing. Yeah, exactly. So, but yeah, I got to give shout outs to the innovators of the what we know of as horror today. And I don't think we've really gotten to you too much, Dustin, about what you thought of the film because you were too busy barfing your own lungs. Rather, a bit of a miracle that you're still talking because you have your iron lung hooked up now. Oh, I see.
I use it on Halloween. Well,
that's what he says. He just uses it all the time. But yeah, please tell our listeners. Of course,
I use it all the time. I thought that was implicit. Well, the first time I saw this, I wasn't really that into horror movies as a genre yet. I had mostly just seen monster movies. And so I think it was my junior year at college, and we were wandering around Walmart, and they had that steel book for $5, like, on the shelf. And it's like, well, that's probably a really good deal, and I've heard so much about this. I felt a little apprehensive about picking it because of the reputation it had. Because my parents were my upbringing was weird. So my dad was normal, and my mom was like hardline conservative Christian. So you will never
define normal.
My dad collected movies. Somewhere at my house, we have the first 5 Friday the 13th movies on beta sealed.
Ooh, sweet.
Yeah, I really want to find those. Anyway. So mom at one point pulled me aside, never see The Exorcist, never see Texas Chainsaw Massacre, never see any of these things. And it's like, I should probably see this at least once, but I was really nervous about it. And then I didn't even watch it until like a year later. It just sat on my shelf. And so my friends were over and we were like, let's see it. It's like, well, okay. And so I started up thinking it's going to be just the most like horrible, nasty, awful thing. And it had the total opposite effect on me. Like, I loved every minute of it. Like, it was great. Like, it made me hungry. Like, I think we went to Walmart and bought steaks afterward. And they were like, how can you eat? And it's like, well, how can you not? Like, when Leatherface
you're telling us that you reached nirvana. Is that correct?
Maybe. It's like, everybody, like, other people.
You reached,
I've shown this to people who've never seen it before. And, the scene where, like, Leatherface, like, jumps out and, like, nails Franklin, like, this girl I was showing it to was just, like, paralyzed in her seat, whereas the first time I saw that, I was like, yeah, fucking get him!
Yeah, me too.
Truly the sign of a well-adjusted child right there, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, Dustin, your dad sounds like my dad. Like, before he died, I still had the VHS tape from, like, 1987 that my dad taped the first 2 Nightmare on Elm Streets off of HBO for me. And
nice.
The VHS tape still works.
Yeah, he did that too. Like, we have unedited Star Wars somewhere in the house. Like, after he died, my mom could not wait to throw out his stuff, so I don't know what's really left. But yeah, my dad was the same way, and he was not he wasn't necessarily into horror, but that's kind of a digression that I won't go into. But so I've had when I started exploring the horror genre, like fervor, like I graduated fairly soon afterward and moved into town, and I had nothing to do but apply for jobs and watch horror movies. So I got into the genre, starting with Chainsaw Massacre 2, which has my favorite scene in, I think, any movie, like the bridge chase. Like, it's hard to describe what makes that scene so good. Like, it's got that Oingo Boingo song. Like, it's funny but mean spirited. Like, it's hard to nail down. But so of the major horror franchises, Chainsaw Massacre is my favorite for a wide number of reasons, and it all kind of started with seeing this one and just totally loving it. The only one I don't like is Chainsaw 3D, which was just disappointing.
Oh, the most recent one?
Oh yeah, it was bad.
Yeah, it was.
It was real bad. It was like
Which
it had the blessings of so many people of the original. Like, how did it get this bad? You were involved. You wrote the first one. Sorry, Dane. Go ahead.
Which actually, while we're on that subject, just a little interesting thing. So, Halloween and Texas Chainsaw Massacre have had a number of sequels. They've had remakes, spin-offs, this and that, imitators. But Halloween is going to have another installment soon, done by Blumhouse, and I've heard
Halloween?
that yeah, well, and what I've heard is that Michael Myers versus.
There's a Teen Leatherface coming out, but Michael Myers versus Leatherface?
Yeah, that's what I've heard is coming out, which I think would be pretty sweet.
In the 90s,
and they've
there
already
was a comic for Leatherface versus Jason.
Oh wait, actually, I think I'm getting those confused. I think it's actually Jason versus Michael Myers. Either way, I think that'd be awesome. Anyway, that's a digression. Anyway, so
You want to know how
important
Leatherface ended?
With a bloodbath, I hope.
Actually, they kind of got along. Like, Jason kind of saw, like, abused child in Leatherface, and they just kind of let him hang around the house and, like, he helped them, like, kill tourists. They had a fight, and they, like, knock him out, but, when Jason revives, like, he leaves.
I thought that I was hoping that they were going to do the dishes and skip through a meadow or something. But anyway, so interestingly enough, both the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Halloween, I don't know why I'm comparing these movies so much, but interestingly enough, both of those films, not too far apart from each other in terms of the years, 4 years apart, both low budget, and they're so well done that they make you think that you have seen a bloodbath when actually, in both cases, there's very little on-screen violence. And what there is all things considered, it's not very shocking, and yet the effect is so strong. For me, anyway, that was something that I found really Chainsaw Massacre. I was expecting it to be a total bloodbath. Surprisingly, there's very little actual on-screen violence. I don't know if anyone else shared this feeling. For me, the most disturbing scene was the one at the dinner table where you got a lot of extreme close-ups of the girl's eyes. That was, I don't know, that just got me. But how does everyone else feel about that?
Oh, with Grandpa sucking on her bloody finger. Oh,
you didn't love alive, did you? Like, he did a good job of looking dead until that scene. Did you know that it took almost 30 hours to shoot that? Like, they went through the dinner street scene in like one shot, and it lasted a full 28 hours, start to finish.
And it smelled horribly in there. It stank so bad. They said, like, from all the dead stuff in there.
125 degrees in there, actually. They boarded the windows.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I rewatched this, I played the commentary so that I would know more of the behind-the-scenes stuff. And Gunnar Hansen was talking about how they were basically going crazy at the end. It's like the one line, it's like, kill the bitch. He's like, yes, kill the bitch. And he's like, thinking. It's like, well, wait, no, don't.
Which it's also Gunnar Hansen died relatively recently. So it's another
25 degrees in there. Was it 25 degrees Celsius or Fahrenheit, though?
125 Fahrenheit, I think, is what.
125.
Yeah.
Dang.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd be kind of going crazy
Actually,
too.
the 70s.
They didn't have extra costumes. The guy who played the hitchhiker said that he had an easier time in Vietnam.
Wow.
It's quite the statement, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
He's on record. You can look it up.
You were talking about the gore and that or lack thereof.
A lot of it is perceived, yeah.
if you think about it, the 70s, though, that was almost a gore renaissance when it comes to blood movies. I mean, I think that was when, Herschel Gordon Lewis was very active at that time, if I remember correctly.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of bloody, like, blood splatter films. In small theaters, of course, those films, a lot of them never really made it to modern times because they were all so cheap.
Yeah, which the Texas Chainsaw Massacre certainly was not. It wasn't exactly or anything.
Cheap movie, you mean, or?
Well, yeah, it was inexpensive.
Well, it was about $300,000 if I'm not mistaken for a chainsaw.
Supposedly, it was made to help launder money from the mob or something like that. Something about the profits from something called Deep Throat.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
They sold the rights to the movie to some production company or something that was owned by the mob, like unknowingly. I think it was.
If you're thinking about Deep Throat, that was, I think, more explicitly tied to the mob, but that's a whole other thing.
Yeah.
But interestingly enough, while we're on the subject of low budget, one thing I found interesting about it was something that James Rolfe, the angry video game nerd, who's of course a consummate lover of horror, one thing he said about it is because it was so low budget, it was made on location in Texas with an almost semi-documentary look and feel to it, that it's got this weird sort of
realism.
Realism. He also described it almost like a science experiment, like something that you couldn't necessarily reproduce, which I think is very true, especially because, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but those bones look very real. Tell me, they were real? I thought they were.
Yeah.
But there's all kinds of bones, too. There's all kinds of bones.
They were working for the veterinarian or something.
Yes, they were getting the dead carcasses of the dead animals from a veterinarian. Well, like, it was their dead animal stock, and that the guy that did some of the prop work, that Robert Burns, he actually did taxidermy on a lot of the stuff that was in that room inside of the house where there's all the feathers and all the bones and all the stuff in there. He actually taxidermied and built most of that with these dead animal carcasses that they got.
So, in other words, your beloved Fifi could live on in immortality thanks to the lovely Tobe Hooper.
Absolutely.
Very nice. And
that stuff is fun to. Yeah. I think they had like real human bones too. Like, it was, from what I understand of the time, it was actually cheaper to like buy human skeletons from foreign countries than to make prosthetics.
Oh yeah.
I know for sure that that's what they did in Poltergeist, but I don't quite remember for Chainsaw Massacre. But I would suspect
there are some real skeletons in the Pirates of the Caribbean ride at Disneyland as well. They got them from the I think UCLA. They got it from UCLA because I guess it was cheaper or something. But yeah, that's been done a couple times.
I've always heard that urban legend.
Well, in the commentary, Gunnar Hansen said that, we got those skeletons from skeleton farms in India. And that made me think, wait, skeleton farm? God damn it, Gunnar Hansen. Don't fall for conspiracies.
That's a horror movie in and of itself.
Skeleton Farm.
Skeleton Farm.
Might be a horror
movie. That's a good one. Well, for those of you listening, send us a spec script for Skeleton Farm, please. I'd love to read it.
You're right, treatment right now for it. Matter of fact.
So, how has everybody's night been?
David, you escaped from the basement. How did you get out? I tied you up.
Surprise!
I'm going to have to do a better job of tying him up. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen.
I was going to say, from the technical acumen experience, I'm guessing Dane just forgot to tie the ropes. But
I've never been good at fine motor skills, so that's probably why. For all of you want to be For all you want to be psychopaths out there, learn how to tie your knots, because you don't want to end up like me. So now
I can tie knots.
Now when we're off the air, David's gonna slit my throat. So fare thee well, everyone. But anyway, hello, David. You just got back from a screening of the new It, isn't that right?
Yes, I did. So,
and how was it?
Sorry. Huh?
Was it legit?
It was legit.
Maybe even
I
lit?
would definitely go and see it. It is part 1. All right, I'm gonna kill you, Pennywise. Anyways, let's.
It just comes out. Sorry.
Almost be Pennywise. You know that, right?
Well, now that you have, now that David has escaped from the torture basement, please let us know your thoughts on the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
I saw that VR.
Well, I originally had seen Texas Chainsaw Massacre in the basement of one of my buddies from back in the day, and I'm not even friends with him anymore. But it was. Well,
was it because of something that happened in that basement on that fateful night?
Oh no!
I won't comment on that. Okay, but in any case, it was kind of ear worn and whatnot. But we stuck it in, and
I bet you did.
Bad jokes. Anyways, let's see. But we stuck it in, and I typically enjoyed it. I mean, the part where
in the movie, right?
Yeah, the part where he was like dressed up in a white meat jacket and slammed that door. That had me hooked, man. So, then stick a chick on a meat hook. There you go. You got a horror film. So.
And a really, really fun Saturday night. I know the feeling. Yeah, but yeah, we just been talking about low budget horror films and impacts that they've had and that kind of stuff. I haven't heard much from Celeste in a while. Celeste, how did you feel? Jumping on this point, did you feel like, because slasher films have often been criticized as being misogynistic, did you get any kind of hints of that from this film or not really?
They all are in a way, in that they sort of it's sort of a lot to get into right now, my thoughts on that actually. But yes,
it's an overly broad subject, admittedly.
Yeah, I could definitely like jump into that. But actually, I was wondering if anyone else ever thought this, because when I was watching the movie, I always thought at the very end, when she jumps in the truck, she's covered in blood, she's getting away, and then they have him waving the chainsaw. And it always made me think of the scene in American Psycho when Patrick Bateman was covered in blood and drops the chainsaw. And their sort of manic reactions sort of seemed like each other, but sort of on an opposite end.
I might have been influenced by that. Because American Psycho was released in the early 90s. It was written
it was after.
No, the book was written in the 90s. The movie was in 2000.
I'm pretty sure the chainsaw thing's in the book too. I've read the book.
Yeah.
And there have also been several like
intense
chainsaw type films that have been made in the with along the slight image of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So it also had a somewhat domino rally effect on horror films in general. It changed the style. So
let's not forget that speaking of the whole misogynistic argument, let's not forget that the weapon of choice for the slasher villain has often been read into as being a sex symbol, whether it's the chainsaw, whether it's the butcher knife, or
so I have
the machete.
I have kind of an issue with
not as with Freddy's glove, but that's been thought of before. I
kind of take issue I kind of take issue with the phallic symbol analysis in a lot of things because anything rod-shaped can be like a phallic symbol. So it's almost to the point of you see things that aren't there. It's like the knife is a phallic symbol. The table leg is a phallic symbol.
It can be a rather.
That
It can
lamp
be.
is a phallic symbol. Like
It can be
that's
rather
how most
tenuous
of that
if you
kind of
overthink it.
analysis sounds to me most of the time.
But isn't this one of the first movies that really use like a power tool, like period, for like your weapon?
That's true.
Well, and let's not
in your
forget
defense,
that
they did do that in Chainsaw 2, actually, with the.
Well, and let's
Katie
not
could probably
forget
explain
that if you've ever actually used a chainsaw or a hedge clipper or whatever in real life, keep in mind that they are meant to hedge, they clip the hedges, or they're meant to chop down wood or something. And memory serves me, in Michael Bay's Pain and Gain, they use a chainsaw to chop up some body parts, except that guess what? The chainsaw blade gets caught in someone's hair and it like jams. They have to go get another one, and they have to return the bloody chainsaw to the store. So it's like, oh yeah, finally we got a movie where a chainsaw actually acts like a tool that's not meant to actually cut through bones, just so throwing that in there. But yeah, you're right. It was one of the earlier ones to use a power tool. We definitely need to see, if you remember from SNL Crazy Egg Beater Head, we definitely need to see the SNL slasher film spinoff featuring Crazy Egg Beater Head, who uses egg beaters as his weapon of choice. I think that needs to happen.
Well, we've got the driller killer, the nail gun massacre guy. We've got quite the wide range of power tools. There's even a jackhammer, kind of. Route 616. Nobody else has seen it. But.
There's also a film called The Refrigerator, except that's about a haunted refrigerator, so it's not like a killer using a refrigerator, but it is a appliance that is used. And there's also Microwave Massacre. There's all these films that are used with
Didn't they do that in Monster with the refrigerator?
You've been seeing Scarface when they used the chainsaw. That was another one.
They did.
That might have been an intentional callback.
There's all kinds of films that use tools or appliances in a way that nature technology did not necessarily intend.
Hockey mask and his machete,
anything sharp, really.
Yeah. Although Jason's weapon of choice generally has been the machete, but he's also not been averse to other kinds of weapons. I think he even had an axe in part 2 when he first appeared as an adult. So he's not been limited by any means, whereas Michael Myers, generally speaking, he tends to like to use the butcher knife. And Freddy Krueger obviously likes his glove, so.
There's kind of a funny thing. When I was little, I had this game called Zombies Ate My Neighbors for Super Nintendo.
Oh yeah.
And one of the enemies was Stanley Decker, the Chainsaw Maniac, and it was a guy in like a muscle shirt with a chainsaw and a hockey mask. And until I saw the Friday the 13th movies, I always thought that Jason used a chainsaw in every movie. It was actually,
but to get back to the
last year, I have a hockey mask that goes with that thing.
Sweet. To get back to the larger point of possible misogyny in slasher films, this is for Celeste and Katie. Is there a way that we as artists, whether we choose to do slasher films or not, how can we do what we love in whatever genre we're in and not fall into those traps, especially with a genre like the slasher genre that perhaps is prone to such a thing?
I think it's kind of a staple of the genre. I don't think you can get away with it, and I don't really think people want to get away from it at this point. I think it's kind of what makes the genre what it is.
Not even with Scream?
I agree with that. Well, I think what I wanted to say in terms of that, I think I agree with what Celeste said too. And I feel like, at least for the Chainsaw Massacre, whatever misogyny does exist within the character dynamics, I think the fact that we get the original final girl in Sally, that final triumphant girl who makes it, like somehow maybe that sort of balances it out a little bit. Like, the lone survivor is a woman, and that sort of kind of plays to the strength of the woman, I think. I sort of take a little pride in that as a woman, I guess.
That's true.
But I don't. I see it the other way. So I think it's almost always a woman who's a survivor girl. And I think Dana and I have talked about this privately. It's always like the woman that's, well, in this one, it's hard to say, but it's usually the one that people don't want to see punished for having bad behavior as a woman. So it's just sort of the more meek woman that ends up coming to her own and being strong, but it's not the one that has sex, and it's not the one that does drugs, and it's not the one that's outspoken. It's the one that sort of fits people's role of what they want women to be. And so she gets rewarded for that.
And I think that's very common in more recent, moving forward. I don't think we see a lot of that in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
No, not
just
that
among the characters, right? And I think that's really why I like it there. I think it works really well in this film, particularly. Yeah, but I agree with what you're saying too. That in other films, they do tend to try to influence the audience as to, it's a brainwashing technique, I think, in some respects.
Right.
I believe,
which is sort of interesting because the slasher genre took off in the 80s, which politically was the age of Reagan era conservatism. So it's sort of this interesting funhouse mirror image of society at the time. Plus, also the fact that, like you said, the types of girls that survive tend to be like the more innocent, virginal ones. So it's almost, you would almost, if you didn't know better, you'd be like, oh, this is like a conservative scare film or something. And yet they generally tended to decry the slasher film. So just kind of interesting how that unintentionally matches up in a weird way. But there have been films that have subverted that expectation, particularly Scream, although that was very on the nose with it. But I know for myself as a director, whether it's a slasher film or any kind of film, that you want to be conscious of the impact that your film is having on those who see it, particularly those that do not fall within your particular racial or gender-specific shell that you happen to have been born in. So it's very important to try and get this kind of information so that way you don't fall into a lot of those traps. I personally think that there is a way to not fall into those traps no matter what genre you're in, but it's certainly not ever going to be a perfect fit. But we as human species do continue to advance as we go along, despite the fact that some of us don't know how to tie a knot, and the original host of the show can't escape without us meaning to. Dustin, you were going to say something?
At which point? I said except... Oh, right, now I remember. I heard one analysis where they were talking about how the family essentially lived without women because grandma was dead, and that's why Leatherface had like the female mask, like the pretty lady mask that he wears at the final part of the film, because he's doing like the traditional like women things, like he's making dinner, like he's preparing the table, and so you could maybe make an argument around that.
And let's not forget that Ed Gein, the real life inspiration for Leatherface,
is really into his mom.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and he not only that, but he had made a woman's suit from the corpse's skin, so which he apparently paraded around his house with. So there's definitely
the movie with Steve Grailsbeck. I know about that. It's fucking weird.
Yeah, which. I mean, the idea is that there's like an absence of a woman presence, and so that it's filled in there, but obviously through a perverted lens.
Psycho with that too, yeah.
I think that this Chainsaw Massacre is definitely a visual film, because especially when the one girl is in the room with all the skulls and the bones and. How the camera was capturing some of the ways the bones were like connected and whatnot, and I think that
the art guys spent a lot of time on those, so
I think I definitely enjoyed that aspect of the film. Well,
oh yeah. Well, let's also not forget the fact that. This was pre-digital. Great, now I can hear myself.
How does it feel?
It feels glorious. Thanks for asking. But anyway, let's also not forget the fact that this was digital, and so we got a lot of stuff that was done on film. So you wouldn't necessarily have the same effect as it would be if it were shot on digital.
I don't think I have delirium.
It's awful quiet.
Is that who's echoing?
Everyone.
No, KJ needs to log out.
I need to log out.
Yes, and then log back in.
Alright, let me do it.
Echo.
See, problem solved.
Yeah, I was.
Okay.
Can none of you, the rest of you, see that on your screen? Like every time someone talks, their profile picture comes up, and then when there's an echo, whoever's profile picture continues to come up is the reason for the echo.
I've had that cat on for like the last quite a while.
There should be no reason for that. Yep, everything's good.
Yeah. Sweet. Yeah, but anyway, the fact that it was shot on film gave it that grain that you would have to. Yeah, it was, but you'd have to like replicate it on digital, and it wouldn't quite look the same. So that's I've generally been a proponent of shooting on digital, if for no other reason that you go from digital to digital. It's easier to make an effect shot. Any shot can be an effect shot, that sort of thing. But for something like this, it does seem like with the kind of grain that film has in it, it's something that you wouldn't necessarily be able to reproduce if you tried to do it today, unless you tried to do like a 1980s like home video throwback, which again, then it wouldn't be the same thing.
Well, the 4K Blu-ray that came out a couple of years ago, they worked really hard to preserve that kind of to preserve like the visual style, like the grain, while still kind of cleaning it up, and it looks basically perfect. So it's possible to preserve that with on digital.
That's good. And I'm obviously a huge Blu-ray fan, but
get the one with the truck.
Oh yeah, that's pretty cool. I don't have the 4K one, or the one it's not a true 4K Blu-ray. It's
mastered in 4K, but it's not a 4K Blu-ray. It's confusing.
Yeah, there's very, very specific difference. And Celeste is telling me that she needs to duck out for a second, which begs the question: anything that we're not talking about?
What about? I know that we were talking about some of the future sequels earlier on. What about Rob Zombie's attempts at bringing back that genre with movies like House of a Thousand Corpses, which was heavily inspired by Texas Chainsaw?
House could be considered a decent attempt at not necessarily a reboot, but a reboot in spirit. It has a lot of the same themes and kind of goes off in. It sort of takes the basic idea from Chainsaw Massacre and goes off in a different direction with it.
And I feel like it borrows a lot from Part 2 as well.
What?
Very quickly, Celeste is telling me that she actually needs to go to bed. So, Celeste, if you'd be so kind as to give us the spiel about where you are, what you're doing, how we can find you, etc.
All right, I'm Celeste. I am a co-host on the Horror Host TV show, Dedgar's Dark Coffin Classics. So I love horror movies and love showing and talking about horror movies. The main host of the show is Dedgar Winter, my partner in crime vampire, and you can find our crazy antics on our Vimeo at vimeo.com/ddcc, or you could look us up on Facebook, Dedgar's Dark Coffin Classics, and you'll find our individual pages and all our crazy stuff we post. And I am also the host for the Glamour Junkies Burlesque Troupe in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Look it up on Facebook, Glamour Junkies, and like our page and try to support us if you can. Thank you so much.
Sweet. And we at Inside Movies Galore love you and wish you a good night.
Good night.
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 Bugs bite.
So I actually
All right.
wanted wanted
So that-
before
it's,
anyone else.
I'll be right back real quick.
let's talk
I
about
actually wanted before anyone else went on to kind of go over one of my favorite shots. One of my favorite shots was actually I don't know why, but when the one girl, you could see her back as she was walking up to the house.
Mhm.
I have to say something about her sexy back because that scene, I mean, she was hot walking up to that porch, even though you knew that she was going to get killed.
So what you're saying is that she brought sexy back long before Justin did.
Exactly.
I think to that point, I would say it really gave a strong impact to the meat hook scene because we
Yes.
now have a relationship with this back because we've watched it, cross our screen for 30 seconds. And then, the impact of thinking about that meat hook going into it. Maybe that was the reason for that. I don't know, but that's kind of what I picked up.
I agree.
I do think that there's a sexual connection there because the bare back of a female is not something that's commonly talked about, at least not openly, although it's definitely a thing because of like backless dresses and that sort of thing. And so I'm sure that there's a force to be played with there with the meat hook on top of the whole slaughtering house that was talked about in the beginning. Anyway, Dustin. Were you gonna say who was?
He's not
Oh
back
yes,
yet.
right, he did. Yeah, who
Anyone else
did I interrupt?
I do think that scene that when you go in the house, just that ideal room where he comes out of at the beginning with the red background and the hanging objects in the background of it right before he slams that door. I always like that imagery. There's something about it that almost didn't belong with the rest of it because there was almost a crispness and a clearness to that you just didn't see for the rest. And I don't know, that imagery just really gave you a solid impression of Leatherface just as he first appeared.
Which part? My internet just cut out. I missed a lot of what happened.
Well, we're not going over it all for you, Justin. Too bad.
The last I heard was about the back, and I did anybody hear what I said about like that shot?
You can't cheat off of someone else's paper.
About the imagery in the part where the backdrop right behind the part where he slams the door.
Like when he like first opens the door and you see like all of the almost trophies of like things that have died here.
So
yeah, that was pretty cool. Like it's a great introduction to him, and it's very sudden too, which adds a lot to it too. It's just like, hello, surprise, you're dead.
But I really feel like that particular look almost doesn't belong with the rest of the house. There's something that's, like I say, it's something bright, something
organized.
It's just or neat or clean even for that matter. I feel like that's what shoves the villain into the forefront when he just appears like right out of there, and then he slams that door after the first kill he does. And that just is such a powerful scene.
Well, and let's not forget that his primary killing weapon in there is his mallet, as I recall, not even the chainsaw, which he doesn't get till later.
And another thing I want to bring out about him as far as Leatherface is like, I haven't heard anyone say it, but like he's scared of them. Like it seems almost as if they're kind of the villain in his eyes. Like that was something
that was a conscious decision that they made. Yeah, that's intentional. You're correct.
And I haven't heard anyone talk about it, but I was saying like that was another thing that just kind of interested me about the movie is like he's afraid of them. So it's kind of like, when you box an animal in a corner, they're going to react sooner or later.
Yeah, that's a good.
The scene where where he like goes into the room and like he's looking out the window after he nails the stake after the mallet. He's like looking around. He's like kind of like nervous, like, you know, where are they coming from? Like Gunnar Hansen said that's what he was supposed to be conveying. It's like, what am I gonna do? Are there gonna be more?
Yeah, I mean,
it's up is did anyone kind of get like a Manson-ish vibe from Leatherface in the Family, kind of sort of, because that's kind of.
I wanted to speak to that about Leatherface. He's actually supposed to be kind of like slow, you know. Gunnar Hansen actually spent like 2 days researching on a campus for mentally disabled people or whatever, and learning the movements and the behaviors so that he could mimic that as Leatherface. So, you know, Leatherface is supposed to be kind of like, you know, not the brightest crayon in the box, you know. Right. So that idea of him being afraid of the people, it makes a lot of sense. You know, he's spooked, like you mentioned, like an animal being backed into a corner. You know, he's very kind of spooked, but also reacting and just doing what he knows how to do. And I think that's really Leatherface is really explored a lot more in part 2 in a completely different way. And I kind of fall for Leatherface in part 2 big time. But yeah, that's another show.
Which interesting that you say that. It's a nice contrast to what would then become the norm with Michael Myers, Jason Voorhees, and Freddy Krueger, who are much more actively predatory in their conquests of people. And also, my dad had a squirrel trap in our attic to get squirrels out of it. When squirrels or other animals are in a trap like that, especially ones that we don't think of as aggressive, like squirrels, for example, like they actually growl. They make these really strange kind of hissing sounds, which I've never heard. But it's definitely true that these normally what we might think of as docile animals can react in very odd ways. So it's kind of a neat real life parallel.
Frogs have a really intense like scream call that they can make if they feel threatened. You can see them on YouTube, and they can bite too. So,
oh wow,
what you're saying.
Actually,
the moral of the story is treat animals and humans with respect, unless they're the original host of this show, in which case put them in the basement and lock the door.
Who just walks into a house that they just, you know, it's like, oh, look, the lights are on. I guess I'll just walk on in the door, you know, in the country when they've already been warned by the...
They had heard that, you know, they had been told, you know, don't mess with other people. Or
well, and they didn't have the library of slasher films that had already been made to warn them against such a thing, so they had to be the guinea pigs.
Yeah, but you don't walk into just somebody's house. I mean, that just that doesn't even make any sense. Why they do that in horror movies? It's just like, oh, look, the lights are on. Somebody's in there. They'll notice me eventually. I just let myself in.
Well, yeah, it seems to be a rule. Seems to be a rule in a lot of horror movies that people have to act dumber than they normally would.
I mean, Texas Chainsaw could have been Castle Doctor in the movie.
That's Texas. A trademark of horror films, where people just do stupid things, that you yourself would say, okay, I would never do that.
Which they made that as a central plot point in The Cabin in the Woods.
Well, The Cabin in the Woods was an intentional send-up of all of those tropes.
It was. It actually, its humor actually was significantly more subtle than it was in Scream, even though Scream came first. So let's see.
I didn't think Scream was good.
I think Cabin in the Woods overall was better. Anything else that we are forgetting about with this?
Not that I know of. I mean,
well, it had very little music. Oh, yeah.
Did anybody talk about what happened with the movie rights? Like how much everybody got paid for this, you know, great masterpiece that we're still talking about 40 years later?
Please.
Basically, nobody got paid. Like, the producers were quite crooked. that's why Gunnar Hansen always charged kind of a lot for autographs, because he didn't make anywhere near what he deserved on it. But Katie probably knows a lot more about that than me, so go ahead.
Well, from what I remember, I think the rights to the movie eventually were sold for like $400,000. So like years after the movie was made and distributed and whatever, I think the whole cast and crew got to split the $400,000. So I think they said everybody ended up with like $5,000 or something for making Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The actor that played Franklin actually got paid for his role because he refused to shoot his last scene without a check in his pocket. So he kind of pushed that forward, so he got paid whatever he was slotted to get paid for it. But as far as like the royalties and stuff, it was something like they owned points in the investment of the film or something like that, and they misunderstood like how much they own because there was a middleman company that owned some too, and it turned out to be like their royalty checks were like $47 and crap like that. So really nobody made money off this film. And then even some of the actors in the film, like for 15 years couldn't use the film as reference to get a job. Nobody cared. It didn't actually start working for them until many years after it was made. So kind of an interesting story there.
Yeah, Halloween was perceived to be a failure until 2 positive reviews came in, one of which was from Roger Ebert, and then it just kind of took on a life of its own. So sometimes when you, the independent artist, are making something that you really believe in, sometimes it takes a while for it to catch on, but that doesn't necessarily it's a failure on a critical or financial level. But it also tells us that we need to be smart with our dealings and our investments so that we can get what we deserve, because distributors can be kind of nefarious on that level.
And I believe it was the distributor they sold it to that had the mob connections.
I don't remember where the story was from, but Gunnar Hansen was talking about that, like how they went to the producer's office and like demanded their cut, and there were 2 like very obvious like mafia bodyguard guys there, and they kind of backed down.
So nefarious things going on there. Just watch your back if you're in a financial arrangement of any kind. Let's see. Anything else that we want to talk about?
There is so much more to these movies. It's hard to hard to condense.
We could always talk about our favorite recipes for chocolate chip cookies.
Well, we could talk about how. Oh,
I have a suggestion.
The black comedy present in this other one. That's a good one.
Suggestion. What's your suggestion?
Oh, it was a cookie recipe.
Oh,
the one on the butter flavored Crisco package. It's my favorite.
Well, there was kind of the intention of some like a dark comedic tone they put in there, but they didn't really do a very good job on it, and it very rarely shows. I mean, there are a few like good glimpses of it, like when like the cook like has I forgot her character's name. Marilyn Burns in the bag, and he's like, no, I don't take any pleasure in hurting people. And then he's like poking her with the stick, like, heh.
Well, now, if we were to take Katie's chocolate chip cookie recipe and combine it with some head cheese, then we would have something.
There you go.
You mean a mess? That's what we'd have.
Well, I don't think I've told anyone what's happening next week.
What's happening next week? Original host of the show who escaped his dungeon prison.
Yeah. He was watching it and having a great time.
Next week, we are having a special guest on the show. His name is Ron Fitzgerald. And
no relation to F. Scott Fitzgerald.
No, not the ship either. In any case, he is an actor who has been in several films: The Item, Magus, Blood Gnome, Incest Death Squad, to name a few. But he's got a film that he was very much a part of called The Dark Realm, which is out on Amazon right now, and I'm going to interview him on some of the films that he in fact, most of the films that he was in. And then afterwards, we are going to talk about Herschel Gordon Lewis's film, The Wizard of Gore.
Ooh.
Which was referenced in the Oscar-winning film Juno, one of my all-time favorites.
And then,
Really?
and then the following,
As was Suspiria.
the following week, I was hoping to, hopefully, this choice is okay with you guys, since Romero also died somewhat recently. Was hoping to do a Night of the Living Dead episode.
Yes,
I'm down for that. I haven't seen that in a while.
That'd be a good way to commemorate
Works for me.
his memory.
That was such
Okay.
a sad thing that the rights went the way.
Maybe I'll go back to the poll system. That way we can.
Like how everybody and their mom seems to have the rights to Night of the Living Dead.
Well, the
It's
way
a horror movie.
the-
You know which one it is.
There are at least 20
way
releases
that,
out there.
the way that they didn't put the copyright notice on the title screen, which in those days was the surefire way to ensure that it would go in the public domain. But if it hadn't, then we wouldn't have the rich library of zombie films that we have today, even though George Romero referred to them as ghouls in the film, which is actually what that's actually what they are, is ghouls. Zombies were originally just people under a trance.
Yeah. But where's the fun in that?
You wouldn't have Night of the Living Bread without the original Romero film.
That's true.
Why don't we wrap this show up with exactly where we're from and what we do.
I think Dustin just cut his own head off. So,
Katie, why don't you go ahead?
yeah, go ahead.
No, you go first. No, you go first. No, you go first.
Katie,
Help
go
us
ahead.
out here.
Okay, I'll go. I'm Katie Cadaver from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I'm a horror artist, model, burlesque dancer, and also a dead girl with Deadger's Dark Coffin Classics, which you heard Celeste talking about earlier. You can find me on Facebook pretty easily. Just search Katie Cadaver, Cadaver with a K. I've got a profile. You can send me a friend request, or I also have a page that you can like, or you can like my artist page, which is Third Eye Open, 3RDEYE 0PEN. And I can get you hooked up with all the other stuff that you need to know and get you hooked up with Deadger's Dark Coffin Classics as well.
Sweet.
Awesome. Dane, why don't you go ahead?
All right. I am Dane Kyle, independent filmmaker from Charlotte, North Carolina. You can connect with me on Facebook and Twitter. My YouTube channel is The Dane Kyle, DaneKeil, where you can also check out my black and white German expressionist silent film Aeternus, which is heavily praised by some celebs in the biz, as well as check out the trailer for my upcoming film noir, The Big Blind. And please subscribe. Stay tuned for the other developments soon in the works, including a feature film, a horror short film, a puppet show, all kinds of stuff coming your way, as well as more opportunities to talk to you wonderful people on Inside Movies Galore, if I can do a better job of keeping David in the torture basement.
You did pretty good, all things considered.
Yeah, thank you, thank you.
In any case, Brandon, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, my name is Brandon. I'm also known as Septum Sin from Septum Sin versus the World. I run a YouTube page right now from that transition from a blog on movie collecting and movie reviews. The current cycle that I'm going through right now is I'm going through the John Johnson Skeleton Key 4-movie series, as a matter of fact. I got accidentally tricked into it when I saw Skeleton Key 2, and I thought it was the sequel to the other Skeleton Key. So now I'm into the 4-movie B horror / comedy series that I'm doing reviews of right now.
Cool. Alrighty. KJ, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, I'm KJ. I am a group. I have my group Thomas Classic Movies on Facebook. It is actually up to 2,000 members right now, currently, and still growing. Also, at the same time, also in school right now, trying to get a social arts degree, and also go over to the University of South Carolina to do film media studies, and also on the side doing a little bit of writing, trying to compile my first feature-length screenplay. So hopefully I get those things done. But besides that, I'm KJ, and hope all you have a great night.
We believe in you.
Thank you.
Yay!
Dustin, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I study geographic information systems and frogs at UWM. I collect movies pretty avidly and I've seen so many special features and making of kind of things that I have pretty good insight into like filmmaking at this point. So it's kind of nice to be able to have a direction for that energy through these shows. Yeah, I don't have anything to promote except my eBay page that I keep not putting anything on. Sebra636.
Alrighty, and my name is David Streggy. I run Movies Galore Milwaukee. I also run this with you guys, which is Inside Movies Galore, which thank you for the journey. I'm sure we'll have many future film discussions, and I think we'll just grow from here.
Like, share, and subscribe. Do it. Now you want to do it.
I'm also a small-time producer. I can now tell everyone that I am one of the executive producers on Wrestle Massacre for 2018. Which
it's like WrestleMania, but taken all the way.
A Thunderdome, as it were.
Which is directed by Brad Twigg of MILF vs. Zombies, Fiendish Fables, believe Frames of Fear, and so on and so forth. So definitely look out for that film. It is one of the more bigger films that I've actually had something to do with. So definitely look out for that. And as I said before, next week we'll be having an interview with Ron Fitzgerald and a discussion on the Herschel Gordon Lewis's The Wizard of Gore. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and hopefully you enjoyed watching us. Subscribe.
The Wizard of Gore, going where the Wizard of Oz did not dare.
That's where we cut.